My name is Jonathan, 57, and I live in Seattle. After my divorce from Karen, when our daughter Sophie was 11, I became the one who carried her life on my shoulders. Karen remarried a man named Michael, a man who loved to talk about business opportunities but rarely had money of his own. I chose not to interfere. I wanted Sophie to have peace, not another war between adults. Divorce already stains a child's sense of safety. I didn't want to add my bitterness to the mix, so I stepped back. I let them build whatever new version of family they wanted, while quietly keeping my place on the edge of her life, dependable, steady, and always reachable. We had our traditions. Every Tuesday we went to a small pizzeria near the harbor. It wasn't fancy. Red vinyl booths, scratch tables, the smell of garlic and the sea mixed together. We always sat by the window, facing the docks, where the fishing boats rested like old men leaning on canes. She'd tell me about her teachers, her friends, her little victories and heartbreaks. She once said that with me, "Everything feels quiet." That became my role, the quiet in her storm. When Karen married Michael, I congratulated her. Not out of joy, but because I thought that's what decency demanded. Sophie seemed happy about it then. She liked the idea of a bigger house, a man who wore pressed shirts and smiled easily. I didn't compete. I kept paying for her schooling, her music lessons, her summer programs. When the braces came, I paid the full bill before Karen even brought it up. Back then, I believed that love wasn't just what you said, it was what you sustained. Years moved like tides. Sophie grew taller, sharper, quieter. Her visits became less frequent, but the phone calls stayed. She'd still send me photos, her new haircut, her art projects, the view from her dorm window. When she got accepted into university, she called crying with joy. I was sitting in my car, parked outside the office. I remember gripping the steering wheel with one hand and wiping my face with the other. I told her she'd earned it, and I meant it. I paid for everything in full: tuition, books, apartment rent, even her groceries through an online card. No loans, no debt. I didn't want her to start her adult life buried in the same holes I had to crawl out of in my youth. Karen thanked me once, briefly, over email. Michael didn't say a word, but I didn't do it for them. I did it because I thought that's what fathers do. They build bridges their children can walk over, even if no one remembers who laid the stones. Every few months, Sophie would come home to visit. She'd always want to meet at that same pizzeria. The place hadn't changed in years. The same faded photographs of old fishermen, the same waitress who always called me Han. Sophie would talk about her professors, her projects, her new friends. I would listen, smiling, my coffee going cold. She never asked much about me, but I told myself that was normal. Children grow into their own worlds. They don't realize how much silence parents swallow. I remember one evening especially. The rain was heavy, the streets shining like sheets of black glass. Sophie sat across from me, her hair damp from the walk over, her laughter bright. She told me she was seeing someone, a young civil engineer named Dylan. Her eyes had that flicker I hadn't seen since she was little, when she'd talk about the future as if it were a sunrise waiting for her. I smiled, though something inside me tightened. That quiet ache of realizing the years were slipping, and I was becoming a man remembered rather than needed. When the bill came, I paid as always. She tried to reach for her purse, half-heartedly, and I said the same line I always did, "You'll get the next one." We both knew she wouldn't, but the ritual comforted me. It kept the illusion of balance alive. Sometimes, I'd watch her leave through the rain, her umbrella small against the gray sky, her figure shrinking until she disappeared into traffic. I'd sit there a little longer, staring at the empty seat across from me. The waitress would bring the check again, not realizing I'd already paid. I'd just nod and whisper, "She's gone," as if that explained everything. At home, the silence waited for me. There were nights I'd pour myself a drink and sit by the window overlooking the water, thinking about how love changes shape but never weight. You carry it even when it's not returned the same way. You keep carrying it because that's what fathers do. Karen and I barely spoke by then. Our communication existed only through logistics, school updates, medical records, bank transfers. Every conversation felt like an invoice. Michael sometimes appeared in the background of her emails. A we, where there used to be I. We appreciate what you've done, she once wrote. We'll handle the next semester. But they never did. I kept handling it. It didn't bother me at the time. Or maybe I didn't let it. I was proud of Sophie. Proud of her discipline, her ambition, her ability to stand tall. If she credited her stepfather for any of that, I told myself it didn't matter, as long as she was safe, successful, whole. But love, when unacknowledged, begins to curdle. You don't see it at first. It hides behind excuses, behind phrases like, she's busy, or, she'll understand one day. You tell yourself she still knows, that somewhere deep down, she remembers who was there when no one else was. But time has a cruel way of editing memories. It replaces presence with narrative, truth with convenience. The last time we had dinner before everything changed, she told me Michael had been giving her advice about her future, how to manage her finances, what to invest in, even what kind of career would suit her personality. She spoke about him with warmth, admiration. I smiled, even joked about how at least someone was teaching her to be smart with money. But something cold settled under that smile. I realized she'd never spoken of me that way. Not to my face. Not in years. After she left that night, I stayed at the table long after the plates were cleared. The rain outside had stopped, and the harbor lights were reflecting in the puddles like ghosts. I thought about how many years I'd spent trying to be her anchor, only to feel the rope slipping quietly through my hands. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of the unraveling. The small, invisible drift before the storm. The first moment when love began turning into debt, and gratitude into obligation. Back then, I still believed that sacrifice meant safety. That if you gave enough, you could hold your place in someone's heart forever. I was wrong. The shift was so subtle I almost missed it. It began in the way Sophie spoke about him, Michael. His name had once been an afterthought, a small mention in passing. Then it began to bloom, creeping into every sentence like ivy climbing a forgotten wall. Michael says it's smart to invest early. Michael thinks Dylan should refinance his car loan. Michael told me not to stress. Real success takes patience. Each time she said his name, it sounded rehearsed, admiring. I told myself it was fine, that she was only being polite, giving her stepfather the kind of courtesy good children extend to adults in their lives. But courtesy began to sound like devotion. When she came home for Christmas, I picked her up at the airport. She was radiant, confident, older somehow. But when she hugged me, it felt brief, an act of obligation, not instinct. On the drive home, she told me how lucky she was to have two fathers who loved her. I smiled and said nothing. I didn't feel like a father in that moment. I felt like the understudy of one. Over dinner, she spoke of Michael's business ventures, his philosophies, his vision. Karen sat nearby, smiling faintly, watching Sophie talk about her husband with the same tone she once used for me, as though admiration were a form of survival. I wondered then if she knew what she was doing, letting our daughter slowly replace my name with his. Later that night, I passed by the living room. Sophie and Michael were talking by the fire. He was leaning forward, giving her advice about her career, about life. She nodded with that eager, trusting expression she used to give me. I stood at the doorway, invisible again, listening to the soft hum of my own obsolescence. Months passed. We spoke less. She still called on birthdays and holidays, but her words became lighter, emptier. Polite updates instead of conversations. I was still paying her rent, her car insurance, her medical bills. She never asked for the help directly. She just stopped pretending to notice it. When she told me she was engaged to Dylan, I was genuinely happy for her. He was polite, mild-mannered, the kind of man who measured his words before speaking. When she asked me to walk her down the aisle, I felt a small flicker of redemption, a chance to matter again. I offered to pay for the wedding, everything, venue, catering, dress, band, flowers, photography, all of it. She resisted at first or pretended to. Then she said softly, "Are you sure, Dad? That's a lot." I told her fathers don't get many chances to give something that lasts. I wired the first payments that same week. The planning took months. I didn't notice how little I was being included. Michael managed the communication with vendors, handling details I thought I'd be part of. When I asked Sophie how things were going, she'd say, "Oh, Michael already talked to them." It was always Michael, the man I never competed with but who now seemed to be quietly competing with me. Still, I didn't question it. Love made me blind, or maybe just tired. Then, 6 weeks before the wedding, I received an email from the venue addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Fields. That was Michael's last name. They were thanking him for confirming final payments. I sat at my desk, staring at the message, my name absent from a list I had built with my own money. I called Sophie. She answered cheerfully, unaware. I asked about the email. There was a small pause, then a nervous laugh. "Oh, yeah, Michael's been helping with the coordination. It's easier that way. Easier that way. Easier to erase me quietly." The next weekend, I attended her bridal shower. A crowded room of laughter and champagne. When introductions began, I noticed people glancing between me and Michael. One woman whispered, "Which one's her father?" Before someone else answered confidently, "The tall one, that's Michael." I stood there, smiling through clenched teeth, a stranger holding a gift, watching another man claim years I had built with my hands. But it wasn't until later that the truth cut through the skin of civility. A week after the shower, Sophie's friend, a sweet, talkative girl named Mariah, sent me a video from the bachelorette party. She meant well, thought I'd enjoy seeing them laugh. But the video was a window I never asked for. In it, Sophie was surrounded by her friends, glowing with that careless joy that only comes when people think no one's watching. Someone asked who was paying for the big day. She laughed, lifted her glass, and said, "My dad's got it all covered." Then she paused, grinning. "And by dad, I mean Michael, the real one, the upgrade." Laughter. Cheers. Someone shouted, "Out with the old model." And Sophie nearly spilled her drink laughing. I froze. My body went still, like time itself refused to move forward. The laughter echoed long after the video ended. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by receipts, floral deposits, catering advances, dress fittings, musician retainers. Over $35,000 already spent. Every cent a word in a story I no longer belonged to. The next morning, I drove to the venue. I met the coordinator in person, handed her my card, and asked a simple question: "Who is listed as the father of the bride?" She flipped through her notes and said, "Mr. Fields, of course. Lovely man. Lovely man." I thanked her, stepped outside, and stood by the harbor, the same one where Sophie and I used to eat pizza. The wind was cold. The water was gray and restless, like it knew something inside me had shifted permanently. It wasn't anger at first. It was something quieter, the stillness that comes when a man realizes he has been replaced in every room he paid to keep standing. When I got home, I opened my laptop. I started a spreadsheet. Line by line, I wrote every transaction tied to that wedding: deposits, rentals, services. At the bottom, I typed in bold, amount paid by the real father, $35,420. Remaining balance, $19,600. Recommended contact for future payments: Michael Fields, the self-proclaimed real father. I stared at the numbers for a long time, then attached the file to an email. The subject line was short: "Final statement." I sent it to Sophie, Dylan, and Karen. It was 11:42 p.m., the kind of hour where truth no longer needs permission. Then I sat back and waited for the sound of the world collapsing. The first call came at dawn. My phone buzzed across the kitchen table while the sky was still a bruised shade of gray. I didn't answer. I just watched it vibrate, listened to the muffled ring fade into silence, and took a slow sip of my coffee. By the time I'd finished the cup, there were 12 missed calls. 3 from Sophie, 5 from Karen, 4 from Dylan. Michael, of course, didn't call. Cowards rarely do when the storm they caused finally arrives. At noon, Sophie texted, "Dad, what's going on? Everyone's freaking out." Dad. The word looked strange now, a costume she'd borrowed for convenience. I stared at it for a long time before replying. You wanted Michael to be the real father. I'm giving him the chance. Minutes later, she called. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice came fast, breathless, shaking between anger and panic. Dad, you can't just pull out like this. The wedding's next month. Everything's planned. Everything's planned, I repeated quietly. But nothing's paid for. Silence. Then, this isn't you. You're being petty. No, I said. I'm being fair. She started crying. You don't understand. People are counting on you. Deposits are due. I know, I said. That's why I included Michael's email in the notice. He can handle the rest. Her voice cracked. He doesn't have that kind of money. I'm aware. The call ended with a click that sounded like a verdict. By afternoon, Karen called. Her tone was all venom wrapped in composure. What the hell are you trying to prove, Jonathan? You're humiliating her. She humiliated me first, I said. You just didn't hear it. Whatever she said, she didn't mean it. She said I was a bank account, Karen. Do you think that kind of sentence slips out by accident? There was a pause on her end. Then a sigh. The sound of someone who knows the truth but can't afford to admit it. She's young. You're supposed to be the adult. I am, I said. That's why I'm done paying for children who never grow up. She hung up on me. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. It was the kind of quiet that settles after a wound. Not peace, but aftermath. 2 days later, the vendors began calling. The florist first, then the band, then the venue. Each one polite, nervous, hesitant. We just wanted to confirm, they'd say, that you're no longer responsible for payments. That's correct, I'd reply. Contact the bride or her family. By the end of the week, everything unraveled. The venue released the date. The caterer canceled the order. The band booked another event. Sophie's dream wedding folded like a house of cards in a strong wind. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just sat by the window each evening, watching the harbor lights flicker across the water. The same lights I once showed Sophie when she was a child, pointing out how they shimmered like coins tossed into a fountain. Back then, she'd asked, do wishes ever come true if they're made on water? I told her yes. Now, I wasn't so sure. Karen sent one last message. You've ruined everything. I replied simply, no. I stopped buying everything. Then there was silence. Real silence. Not the kind that waits to be filled, but the kind that stays because it belongs there. In that quiet, something inside me finally settled. For years I'd been the man who paid without question. The one who mistook generosity for love. I used to think endurance was a virtue, but endurance without respect is just a slow form of dying. The house felt larger now, emptier but honest. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. A week later, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. Sophie's, looping and careful. The way it looked when she used to write Father's Day cards. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what kind of words waited inside. It began simply, Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. The first line took the air out of me. I said things I didn't mean. Maybe I did mean them then, but not now. I wanted everything to look perfect. I wanted people to see me as someone who had it all together. 2 loving parents, a happy home, no divorce, no cracks. I wanted to prove that families could be fixed, even if they weren't real. I didn't realize I was hurting the only person who actually stood by me when everything was falling apart. The words bled together as I read. She described Michael's excuses, Dylan's disappointment, Karen's silence. She said Michael told her he couldn't afford the costs, that he wasn't expecting to be financially responsible for symbolic things. Symbolic things. That was the word he used. Sophie wrote that she felt like she'd betrayed the wrong man, that she saw now who had always carried the weight quietly, without applause. By the end of the letter, her handwriting had changed. Slanted, uncertain. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I hope one day you'll meet me again. Maybe at the harbor, and we can just talk. I don't want money. I just want peace. I folded the letter and set it on the table beside my cold coffee. Outside, the sky had turned the color of slate, the first drops of rain tapping against the window like distant knocks. That night I didn't sleep. I walked along the harbor instead, tracing the same path we'd walked 100 times before. Father and daughter, pizza boxes in hand, the air heavy with salt and laughter. I stopped at the bench where we used to sit, and for the first time in months, I let myself remember the good without bitterness. I met her there 3 days later. She looked smaller, humbled, her voice quieter. She didn't wear makeup. Her engagement ring was gone. I ended it, she said. The wedding. Everything. I nodded. I know. She took a breath. I don't expect you to fix anything. I just wanted to see you. We sat there for a long time, saying very little. The wind carried the sound of gulls, the soft clinking of boats against their moorings. The water below us moved like glass fractured by light. Finally, she said, "You were right." I shook my head. "It's not about being right." She looked at me, eyes wet. "Then what is it about?" "Boundaries," I said. "Love doesn't survive without them." She nodded, staring out at the horizon. "I thought love was endless." "It is," I said. "But even endless things can be wasted." We sat until the sky turned dark and the lamps flickered on. When she stood to leave, she hesitated. "Can we start over?" she asked. I thought about it for a long time before answering. "We can start honestly." She smiled faintly, then walked away. I watched her until she disappeared into the city lights. Back home, I placed her letter in the top drawer of my desk. Not to treasure, not to forget, but to remind myself of the cost of silence. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a provider. I felt like a man. The phone stayed quiet. The world kept turning. And for once, I let it. The week after the spreadsheet, my phone turned into a siren. It screamed from the counter, from the desk, from the nightstand. I let it scream. When I finally picked up, it wasn't to negotiate. It was to end the noise. "Dad, please," Sophie began. "No," I said. One word like a locked door. Silence. Then pleading. Then anger that tried to wear my name like a mask. I let it run out of breath. When she asked what I wanted, I told her the truth. Respect. And since respect has been declared imaginary, the bills must be, too. 2 days later, the first failure arrived. The venue released the date at 3:17 p.m. I know because the email came with a timestamp, a neat digital obituary for a wedding I was no longer paying to keep alive. The florist followed. The jazz trio sent a brief apology. They had found happier money elsewhere. The photographer asked if I would still want family portraits on the day, a small, sad offer that misunderstood the corpse on the table. Karen called once more, the edge back in her voice. "You've humiliated your daughter." "She humiliated her father," I said. "If the word still means anything to you, it means you don't abandon her." "I'm not abandoning her. I'm ending the lie." After that, years of quiet labor rose up like a tide and receded from my shore. I slept. I worked. I walked along the harbor alone. Every now and then, a stranger at the pizzeria would talk too loudly about plans and promises, and I would hold my breath until the room emptied of their optimism. 3 weeks passed. Then the letter arrived. It was handwritten. Her script hadn't changed since middle school. Rounded, earnest, a little too careful. The envelope smelled faintly of the perfume Karen used to wear when she wanted to feel like someone else. I opened it with a knife and braced for the damage. "Dad," it began, and I felt my jaw harden against the softness of that word. "I know you don't owe me anything, least of all your time." I told a joke that wasn't a joke. I tried to build an image and worshipped the man who let me. I betrayed the one who didn't. She told me what I already knew. The plan collapsed. The vendors left. Dylan grew small under the weight of numbers. Michael shrugged at reality like it was weather. She wrote that she had not slept. She wrote that she had tried to apologize and heard how thin her words sounded. She wrote that she had ended the engagement because love built on debt is a mask, and she could taste the elastic. "Could we meet at the harbor?" she asked at the end. No money. Just you. I stood at the sink holding the letter, the faucet running over my hand until the cold felt honest. Then I went to the drawer where I keep the takeout menus, found the pizzeria's grease-stained flyer, and called to ask a question I hadn't asked in years. Is the corner booth open on Tuesday? I didn't tell her. I didn't confirm. I just sat there on Tuesday at 6 p.m., the water dark, the gulls needling the sky, the waitress saying, "You're early, Han." The way she always did. I ordered 2 Cokes and a small margarita out of habit, then changed it to large because memory is hungrier than the body. Sophie arrived late, out of breath, eyes swollen, hair pulled back like a truce. She sat without touching me. Her hands were empty. Good. I didn't want an offering. I wanted truth. I'm sorry, she said, and the words were small, but they were real. I tried to make a picture that didn't hurt. I hurt you instead. The pizza came. We didn't touch it. I watched the steam leave the crust like a spirit finally evacuating a house. She stared at it as if it were a calendar burning. Michael said the wedding was symbolic, she whispered. He said paying for symbols is the job of men who want to look generous. I felt the old ache smile. He would know. She nodded, swallowing hard. He doesn't have it, Dad. He never did. I think I used him as a character. It made me feel like the divorce didn't break anything. It broke everything, I said. But some things can be set without being made new. Do you hate me? I don't know how to hate you, I said. And it was the truest sentence I'd spoken in months. But I know how to stop bleeding. She flinched. Then she breathed once, twice, like someone surfacing after an overlong dive. I ended it with Dylan, she said. He said love should survive money. I said love should stop lying. We sat there like a ship and its anchor staring at each other in low tide. I told her about the Tuesday nights she'd missed, about the empty chair that felt heavier than her body ever had. I didn't ask for tears. I didn't want them. I wanted the ledger closed. Come walk, I said. We left the pizza untouched and let the doorbells announce our retreat. The evening smelled like wet rope and regret. Boats murmured against their slips. Somewhere a jazz radio drifted from a fisherman's van, a tinny reminder of music I had tried to buy. We walked to the end of the pier. The city kept its distance in light and glass. She kept hers in silence. When she spoke, her words were slow, careful, as if any one of them might break. I've taken you for granted my whole life, she said. I don't know how to fix that. You can't fix it, I said. You can pay it. The currency is attention. She nodded. Then she said something I didn't expect. I got a job. I turned. Doing what? Marketing assistant. Entry level. Nothing glamorous. She met my eyes fully for the first time that night. It's mine. Good, I said. One syllable, but it felt like a vote to keep the lights on. She smiled, brief and crooked. I'm paying my own rent. Cut up the card. I told Mom to stop forwarding bills to you. How did that go? She cried, she said. Then she asked if Michael could help. He said he'd make a few calls. The smile vanished. He always says he'll make a few calls. Calls are free, I said. We watched the harbor until the water went black enough to hold the moon. She shivered. I took off my jacket and put it over her shoulders. The gesture felt old and brand new at the same time. She didn't thank me aloud. She didn't need to. Can we meet here again? She asked. Yes. Every Tuesday? I let the word settle inside me before I released it. Every Tuesday. We turned back toward the restaurant. The waitress caught my eye through the window and tapped the cold pizza with one finger like a patient mother scolding 2 fools. I nodded, and she boxed it with a smile that forgave us for wasting heat. At the car, Sophie hesitated. I don't call him Dad anymore, she said. I call him Michael. I nodded again, slower this time. Names should be earned. And you? She asked quietly. I've always been what I am, I said. You just forgot. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the child I raised was standing there inside the woman who had betrayed me. This is my father, she whispered to no one and everyone. It wasn't performative. It wasn't loud. It was liturgy spoken back to life. We parted. She drove toward a small apartment with a crooked mailbox and a thin wall between her and other people's arguments. I went home to a house that finally felt like mine because I had stopped renting it out to need. Days became a steady, disciplined march. She worked. She texted me photos of bad coffee and good sunsets. She asked about tires, taxes, the noise a sink makes when it's learning to be old. I answered. I didn't overstep. I didn't pay. I showed up. Karen tried once more. Voice trained into sweetness it couldn't hold. You could make this easier for her. She's making it honest, I said. That's easier later. Michael sent me a message with no punctuation. Sorry for the confusion. As if identity were a cloud that had drifted the wrong way. I didn't reply. He had been the weather for too long. Preferred climate slow, patient, real. On a gray Tuesday that smelled like December even though it wasn't, Sophie and I sat at the harbor and ate the pizza while it was hot. She talked about fixing a campaign that wouldn't convert. I told her that people don't change because a headline tells them to. They change because the bill comes due. She smirked at that. Wonder where I learned the metaphor, she said. Not from Michael, I said, almost smiling. The waitress refilled our Cokes. The boats chimed. Somewhere a boy asked his father if gulls have names. We took the long way back to our cars. At the corner, she stopped. I know this doesn't make what I said disappear, she told me. I know forgiveness isn't a coupon. It isn't, I said. It's a contract you sign with yourself. The other signature may never arrive. She nodded. Have you signed it? Most days, I said. Some days I read the fine print again. She laughed without joy, but without shame. Progress, not victory. Months later, she introduced me to a coworker on the pier. She didn't whisper. She didn't hesitate. She didn't check the room for Michael's shadow. She just said, clear as foghorn, "This is my father," and that was all I ever needed. But I'll be honest. Need is a poor architect. It builds narrow rooms. What I wanted was smaller and harder. A clean ledger, a boundary that didn't require a witness, a life that answered to itself. The family didn't reconcile. Karen still walks the long way around the truth. Michael still sells opportunities to men who can't afford groceries. Dylan married someone who looks happy beside him in squares of filtered light. The harbor keeps its secrets, and the pizzeria plays old songs for new couples who think ceremonies are currencies. Sophie pays her bills. She returns my texts. She buys the pizza sometimes and doesn't make a show of it. She doesn't call to ask for money. She calls to ask for time. And when she says goodbye, she says, "Dad," like the word has weight again. So here I am, a man who stopped funding his own erasure and chose the violence of boundaries over the comfort of myth. I lost a wedding. I kept a daughter. Maybe that isn't redemption. Maybe it's just arithmetic. Tell me, then, was I wrong? Or did I do the only merciful thing a father can do when love is spent like counterfeit?